We have a pretty full schedule this morning and really this day, so I'm not going to take long. Most of you probably know Casey Lazar. He's, what's your official title? Head of?
I call myself president. But
president.
Yeah,
He's the president of the Heavy Metal Students Club here at UVic, and he works hard on behalf of metal and metal studies, putting on shows, and as well as helping other stuff like this conference happen. And when I first started, not for this conference, but a couple of years ago, or already 3 years ago now, I guess, we started working on the South of Heaven Symposium here on heavy metal and religion. And people were saying, oh, you should, check out the Heavy Metal Students Club. So I contacted Casey, and he was super excited, and I didn't know who he was. And I came to the first meeting that I was invited, and I was a bit early. There were some people there, and we were talking about Casey, and everybody said, "Oh, the moment you'll see Casey, you'll know who he is." And since then, I've sort of been stuck behind him at various metal shows and in other venues. And so Casey is going to talk today about heavy metal parking lot. Is it a representation of heavy metal in the 80s? Thank you, Casey.
For those of you who don't know, Heavy Metal Parking Lot is a 17-minute long documentary that's become a cult classic ever since it was first broadcast on public access in 1986. And it chronicles the pre-show rituals of metalheads in Maryland just before a Judas Priest concert on their Fuel for Life tour. It spawned numerous homages, parodies, and spin-offs, and has greatly influenced the stereotypical view of a heavy metal fan in the 1980s. And while it may portray an accurate representation of a segment of heavy metal fans, it by no means represents heavy metal fans during that time period as a whole. Heavy Metal Parking Lot takes place at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland on May 31st, 1986. When watching the movie, it's important to have a sense of what's going on in heavy metal at the time. First thing to know is glam metal. Glam metal has been probably the most commercially successful genre of metal, fully entering the realm of mainstream music. It's very poppy and a mainstream version of heavy metal. It incorporates things like slow ballads and love songs, as well as a strong visual aspect that includes lots of makeup, hairstyling, and flamboyant clothing. Some people don't even consider it a form of heavy metal due to its departure from traditional heavy metal sounds. Also, during this time, the new wave of British heavy metal bands were undergoing some pretty drastic changes. Due to the popularity of glam metal, the biggest bands in the Nawabum were becoming influenced by the movement. During Heavy Metal Parking Lot, Judas Priest were on their Fuel for Life tour, which was in support of their album Turbo. And historically, Turbo wasn't very well received, despite going platinum in several countries. It was considered to be Judas Priest's attempt at glam metal. Proof of this glam influence can be found in the choice of having Dawkins open for them on this tour. Judas Priest wasn't the only Nawabum band to undergo changes around now. Although it wasn't released until later in the year, Iron Maiden's Somewhere in Time included the use of synthesizers, which traditionally hadn't been used in heavy metal until its incorporation into glam. The other side of heavy metal in the 80s was thrash metal. Generally speaking, thrash metal is a lot more underground of a movement than glam metal was. Although it did gain mainstream popularity for a time, it never achieved that which glam metal did. Originating in California in the early 80s, by the mid-80s it was exploding faster than it ever has. Drawing influences from the new wave of British heavy metal as well as various forms of punk, it was much harsher and less accessible than glam metal was. 1986 saw releases from Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica, Creator, and many other high-profile bands. So, here's a pretty basic timeline of heavy metal. This blue bar sort of represents the time period that we're looking at when considering heavy metal parking lot. The important thing to take note of is that heavy metal continues to evolve through thrash metal, while glam metal it doesn't really lead to anything as far as heavy metal is concerned. Today, glam metal is pretty much just nostalgia, while thrash metal is still alive and is still very active. Yeah, in short, thrash metal led to what metal is today, while glam metal led to nothing. So here's the last piece of background information that I need to show you, or I need to tell you about before I show you the movie. Posers. Poser in the heavy metal context is someone who listens to metal just because it's popular in their social group or their surrounding. Well, they may enjoy the music, they wouldn't actually feel connected to it in the way that a true metal fan would. Due to glam metal's popularity, its fan base was rampant with these posers, only listening to heavy metal because it was on the radio and shown on MTV. This could be why glam metal really never led to anything, but, I'm not going to get into that too much. At the time, thrash metal fans maintained a very anti-poser attitude. There are stories from the early days of thrash metal about raiding parties, who would go beat up posers and cut their jackets up with garden shears. This hostility towards posers was necessary to create a separate identity for thrash metal fans and prevent thrash metal from being diluted by these posers. So I'm going to show you the documentary now. It's 17 minutes long, so it's a while, but it's something that you really have to see. So, Okay, so that was Heavy Metal Parking Lot. There's a few extended versions and follow-ups and stuff that you can check out on YouTube if you want. Think about the people that were in the film. What sort of band T-shirts did they have, or what bands did they mention they liked? Sure, there were a few people who liked Metallica or had a Slayer shirt or something, but the majority of the people shown in the movie mentioned that they listened to other mainstream bands. One guy mentioned Twisted Sister and stuff like that. But yeah, the vast majority of people there, they listen to mainstream radio heavy metal, and so since posers were so rampant in in those genres, you have to wonder how many of those people shown in the movie are considered to be posers, or how many would get like beat up by Paul Bailoff, or so the most of these people would end up losing interest in heavy metal in a couple years, corresponding with the with the collapse of glam metal and the I guess disappearance of heavy metal from mainstream music. I always thought it would be interesting if the filmmakers had gone around and asked people, "Are you a metalhead?" To just see how many people would be willing to actually define their identity by the musical genre of heavy metal. I don't think very many would. So to illustrate the point, I'll give you the example of Zebra Man. He's probably one of the most popular characters, and back in 2003, the creators of Heavy Metal Parking Lot actually attempted to do like a follow-up on some of the people in the movie, and at the end they managed to track down Zebra Man, and if you recall in the movie, he bashes Punk pretty hard, and Punk's a pretty big influence on thrash metal, and thrash metal led to what heavy metal is today. So he was pretty much bashing heavy metal as a whole, right? When he's interviewed in this follow-up, pretty much the first thing he says is that he hasn't hung out with those guys in years and isn't really into heavy metal anymore. He says that he mostly listens to country music because that's what's on the radio that he listens to. So, what's the point? Like, the people who are in heavy metal law are posers, but what does that mean? Point is, heavy metal parking lots representation of the culture is significantly overgeneralized. Although it could be said to depict heavy metal culture in the 80s, you have to put some limitations on that statement. It would be far more accurate to say that heavy metal parking lot portrays a scene of pop culture heavy metal, rather than it would be to say that it portrays metalhead culture. Heavy Metal Parking Lot documents the mainstream music audience that just happens to be living in a time when the popular music is grouped itself with heavy metal. It would be the equivalent of going outside like Sugar downtown on a Friday night and filming the people in line to dance to top 40 pop songs, right? That's not an accurate representation of electronic dance music culture or rave culture as a whole. So like Heavy Metal Parking Lot isn't accurate representation of heavy metal culture as a whole. If you can sort of see the parallels between those examples.